friends. Today we are talking about weight stigma, which is a serious topic that doesn't get as much attention as I think that it should. And so we're just going to go over some basics of weight stigma and why it's important to recognize and try not to exhibit in your own life, and then try to combat it in our wider world. And we're in my office today because one, weight stigma is a serious topic, and two, I have my artwork of Michael Scott from The Office in my office. And Michael Scott definitely exhibited weight stigma during The Office, so he is an example of what you should not do if you want to be a supportive supervisor and make the world a better place. Weight stigma is really important because it may be one of the mediators between the correlations that we do see between being in a larger body, having a higher BMI, and health consequences like heart disease, diabetes, etc. So remember, correlation is not causation. So just because we see a correlation between being in a larger body and these health outcomes does not mean that being in a larger body causes these health outcomes. In the middle of this relationship are different mediators and moderators of the relationships. And one of these is weight stigma. So just the fact of being stigmatized for your weight can lead to negative health outcomes. Things like disordered eating, depression, anxiety, lower self-esteem, and physical health outcomes can be impacted as well. And we might see this relationship between weight stigma and negative physical health outcomes because of allostatic load. An allostatic load is basically chronic stress, and when you have chronic stress, it can affect your cardiovascular system, your nervous system, your digestive system, all of your systems, because it will increase inflammation, increase the amount of stress you're feeling, and then we have health outcomes with feeling chronic stress. So weight stigma can impact both our mental health and our physical health, and it can mediate or moderate this relationship between being in a larger body and exhibiting some sort of disease. So weight stigma can also increase your chance for weight gain and decrease your chance for weight loss, which is generally not the outcome that people want when they're feeling weight stigmatized. Why this can happen is because comments that bring on weight stigma or feelings of weight stigma can make people less likely to go to places where they think they'll experience weight stigma. And one of the biggest places to experience weight stigma is at the gym, because the equipment might not be available to people of all bodies. You might feel really exposed if you have to wear workout clothes or a swimsuit. You might get looks or comments from people who are at the gym. So people who are in larger bodies that are experiencing weight stigma may avoid places like the gym, so then they're not exercising and they're not moving their bodies, so they may feel even worse. And then there's also this kind of like internalized messaging from diet culture that people can feel, which is like, if I'm in a larger body, I shouldn't be able to move that body. And that is then very demotivating to actually starting to move. So because of our weight stigma, we're not helping people by stigmatizing them. Shaming people is not going to help them become more active or conform to a certain body size. Shame is not the way to go. When we shame people, we increase weight stigma, which can actually make people less likely to do great health behaviors like be active, and it can also trigger maladaptive eating behaviors such as highly restricting calories or even binging, because you just feel like, shoot, there's nothing I can do, I don't want to feel badly, and you go to food for comfort and then you feel worse. So weight stigma is really tricky because a lot of times people feel shame towards their body weight, and the shame is supposed to get them to eat right and exercise more, and it actually does the opposite, plus adds so much mental damage and drama. Weight bias and weight stigma can really increase your chances of experiencing weight cycling. And weight cycling in and of itself is related to negative health outcomes and gaining more weight. So weight cycling is when you lose weight and then gain weight, lose weight, gain weight. So you're cycling on and off diets consistently, and weight cycling is definitely associated with negative health outcomes. Diet, Christy Harrison talks about weight stigma, and she quotes an activist and author, Virgie Tovar, and the 3 types of weight stigma. So we have this intrapersonal type, which is how we stigmatize ourselves around weight. We have interpersonal weight stigma, which is when we're being stigmatized by others. And then we have institutional weight stigma, which is when like the institutions around us are stigmatizing. So intrapersonal weight stigma is when we are really tough on ourselves. People who are underweight or the quote unquote normal weight range can experience weight stigma intrapersonally, especially. Because we live in diet culture, many of us of all shapes and sizes think that we should be in a different body size than we are. And so we're basically stigmatizing our own selves. And that type of stigmatization, intrapersonal weight stigmatization in yourself, can lead to lower self-esteem, disordered eating behaviors, and all the negative consequences we see from weight stigma. The bigger the difference there is between your actual weight and what your ideal weight is in your own head, we're talking about the weight you wish you were. So it might have nothing to do with like a BMI chart or a medical doctor's recommendation. It's the weight you think you should be. The difference between where you're at and where you want to be at, the bigger that difference is, the more negative consequences people tend to experience from weight stigma, the more they stigmatize themselves. And so we really are tough on ourselves. And one of the biggest, forms of weight stigma is this intrapersonal weight stigma that we have against our own selves. Internalized weight bias is also very problematic because it's like this belief that you deserve the weight stigma that you're experiencing. And that like internalization of the weight bias, when you feel like you deserve that is associated with disordered eating behavior, really low self-esteem, depression, all of these negative mental health consequences, and it's not helping people to feel good in their bodies, to treat their bodies like temples and to do what makes their body feel good. It's very constricting and shaming. Level of weight stigma is when we are experiencing stigma from others, and you can imagine examples of this, but one kind of type of weight stigma that's been studied extensively is like how people in larger bodies are viewed in the job market. So people in larger bodies are less likely to get hired, and when they do get hired, they're less likely to earn as much money as people in smaller bodies. So that is an example of interpersonal weight stigma and kind of institutional weight stigma, but interpersonal where you're meeting someone and they have this impression of you that's not you, and they're not looking at your qualifications, they're just stereotyping. So that's an example of interpersonal weight stigma. Interpersonal weight stigma can also be like bullying about weight. It can be your friend even commenting on your weight. Anything where you're interacting with somebody else and they're speaking to you about your weight in a negative way can definitely be interpersonal weight stigma. With institutionalized weight stigma, this is things like how airplane seats don't fit people of all bodies, how clotheslines do not fit people of all bodies, how the medical system might not treat your actual problem. If you're in a larger body, they'll just say, oh, your knee hurts, lose weight, but you might have a torn ACL, but they don't even look at it because they think that you should just lose weight to solve your problem. That's institutionalized weight stigma, and that's a whole form of weight stigma that's very prevalent in our society. It's important to realize that public health interventions, even though they may be well-meaning, can actually perpetuate weight bias. So when you're designing public health interventions, make sure that you're including them for all body shapes and sizes. We can encourage health behaviors, eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, moving our bodies. For people in all body shapes, we do not need to stigmatize a certain body shape. And also make sure about the visuals that you're using for public health messaging. So, we've all seen those stories on the media about, or on the news about like the obesity epidemic, and then they have like people in larger bodies walking across the screen headless. Like, they don't show their heads, they just show their larger bodies, and always like a very distinguished t-shirt or shorts. It's like, if you saw that and you saw your unicorn shirt, you would know it was you because it was the unicorn shirt, but they've cut your head off and they're just using you as an example of like a fat person as the obesity epidemic. That's really shaming. That's so nasty. So don't use that type of imaging when you're making a public health campaign, and make sure it's accessible for all types of bodies, not just aimed at one segment or not just doable for one segment. We also need to be mindful when we talk about weight stigma and weight bias that a lot of like how we form the ideal of what weight we want people to be is like a very white ideal, and it is not respectful of other cultures, of other ethnicities, of other races that might have other body ideals. So these forcing everybody into one mold and then stigmatizing anybody who doesn't meet that mold is kind of racist. It's definitely racist because not all races, not all ethnicities are going to want to be in that mold or can be in that mold genetically. Genetics have a large part in how our bodies look. So when we are perpetuating weight bias, we are really perpetuating social inequities that tend to fall along racial lines and also gender lines. So women tend to feel more weight bias than men, but men can feel it. It's just that women have a deeper relationship with diet culture, I'd say. So women are very prone to weight bias and feeling, even internalizing weight bias a lot as well. So just remember that if you're causing someone to feel weight bias, or if you're developing a program, or if you're a health practitioner who's immediately going to weight as the cause of all your patients' problems, then you might be perpetuating social inequities that in other spheres of your life you may be trying to bring justice to. So bring justice to weight as well by trying to dismantle your weight bias. I hope that we've established that weight bias is in and of itself associated with a lot of negative health consequences, and any studies that look at weight and health should really be measuring weight bias to see if that is causing any correlation between weight and health. If the study's not measuring weight cycling and weight bias, then they may be missing a whole slew of relationships that would be responsible for the association between weight and health. So that's number one. That's one thing that we can do, is look at research and make sure that it's accounting for weight bias and weight cycling. When we talk about combating weight bias out in the world, the first thing I think you can do is recognize that you probably have weight bias. If you're a person that's grown up in America or Western culture, you probably have weight bias because diet culture is so entrenched here and we are taught to worship the thin ideal. So you can be aware of your own implicit weight bias. Even as someone who wants to combat weight bias, I have implicit weight bias that I need to check at a lot of turns. And you have to continually check yourself on this. Taking the implicit association test from Harvard that you have to take for class this week will help you realize if you do have some of these weight biases, and then at least you know that you might need to pay conscious attention in certain situations so you can make sure that you're not being weight biased. Many of you are going to go out in the world and become health practitioners, public health practitioners, psychologists, doctors, nurses, exercise scientists, dietitians. You're going to go out in the world and make a difference. Business people. All of you in your sphere of influence can combat weight bias by making sure that the product that you're making, the healthcare that you're delivering, the organization you work within is not weight biased. So making sure to work within your sphere of influence to bring up the fact that weight bias exists, because this is like one of the only forms of bias that we all kind of still laugh about. You know, that's like why fat people jokes are a thing, because we're laughing about that still, even though we've eliminated the funniness to so many other types of bias. We need to do that here too. It's not funny to make fun of someone's weight. So in your sphere of influence, you can make sure that you don't do this. And it is hard. Like I used to share clips that would have been very weight biased and I thought they were funny and they weren't. And I really apologize for that, you know? I'm working now to do this type of work so that I can make a better positive difference and not shame students, not make students feel less than if they are in a different body size. And those of us who have privilege because we are in a majority racial group, a majority gender group, a powerful position in our jobs, quote unquote normal body size, we need to be speaking out against weight bias to help anybody who's experiencing it, help be that voice. So within your sphere of influence, make sure that you're looking for weight bias and then you're trying to correct it where you can. And I agree that it is hard, it is not always possible, but it is something that we can all work towards together. And I hope that we can have a good discussion in class about concrete ways that we can take this forward. So this was our primer on weight bias, weight stigma, fat phobia. And there's so much more that we can explore. There's research, there's personal anecdotes and stories. I urge you to read those because I cannot summarize people's experience of weight bias the same way that they can and in the most powerful way. So I will link below to some resources that you can read more about people's experience and hopefully be motivated to help dismantle weight bias in the world. Thanks for watching. Bye.